October 13th, 1977, just before 2 in the morning, a quiet stretch of 46th Street in Woodside, Queens. Mickey Spillane stepped out of a bar called the Fountain Blue, walked 20 feet to a corner phone booth, and dropped a dime to call his wife. He never finished the call. 2 men came up behind him fast. 4 shots tore through the cold autumn air. The first round hit him in the back. The second spun him around. The third and fourth dropped him onto the sidewalk, the receiver still swinging from its cord, his blood pooling on the concrete outside that phone booth on Queens Boulevard. By the time the squad cars rolled up, Mickey Spillane, the last gentleman of the Irish mob, was already gone. This wasn't just another gangland hit. Spillane was the Irish boss of Hell's Kitchen for almost 2 decades. He refused to touch heroin when every other crew in New York was getting rich off it. He returned kidnap ransoms to families who couldn't afford to lose them. Every Christmas, he walked the tenements on 10th Avenue, handing out turkeys to widows and envelopes to mothers whose husbands were locked up in Attica. He was a gangster who believed in a code, in an era when the code was already dying. This is the story of how a young, hungry psychopath named Jimmy Coonan and a Vietnam veteran named Mickey Featherstone stalked the gentleman boss of Hell's Kitchen for 2 long years. This is how 4 bullets outside a Queens phone booth ended the old Irish mob. And this is how the Westies, the most savage crew the West Side ever produced, were born from his blood. But here's what the history books leave out. Spillane didn't lose Hell's Kitchen because he was weak. He lost it because he was decent. And in 1977 New York, decency was the one thing a gangster couldn't afford. You have to understand the world Mickey Spillane came up in. Hell's Kitchen wasn't a neighborhood. It was a country. Roughly 30 blocks of brick tenements and longshoreman bars stretching from 30th Street up to 59th, between 8th Avenue and the Hudson River piers. Irish since the famine. Catholic since forever. Poor in a way that bred either saints or killers, and sometimes both in the same family. Michael J. Spillane was born in 1933 on West 47th Street, the son of a longshoreman. He was named, the family always insisted, after the old neighborhood, not the pulp novelist. He grew up in railroad flats with no hot water, ice on the inside of the windows in February, and the constant sound of trains rattling down the 10th Avenue freight line. His father drank. His mother prayed. Mickey did both. By the time he was 17, Spillane was running with a crew called the Markin Brothers, a loose group of Irish kids who controlled the floating crap games and the loan sharking around the Hudson piers. He was tall, handsome, quiet in a way that made men nervous. He didn't yell. He didn't posture. When he wanted something, he asked once. The second time, he didn't ask. In 1966, Spillane made the move that defined his career. He kidnapped Eli Ziccardi, a top lieutenant for the Genovese family who ran a massive Shylock operation out of the West Side. Spillane held Ziccardi for 3 days, demanded $50,000 from Anthony Salerno himself. Got it. Released Ziccardi unharmed. Then handed back $20,000 of the ransom because, as Spillane told one of his crew, taking too much would have been disrespectful. That single act made Mickey Spillane a legend on the West Side. The Italians wanted him dead. Fat Tony Salerno never forgot. But the Irish on 10th Avenue saw him differently. He'd taken on the Genovese family and walked away with his life. He became their boss, not because anyone voted on it, because nobody else dared to challenge him. By 1968, Spillane controlled everything west of 8th Avenue, from the Lincoln Tunnel up to the Hudson Yards. The Jacob Javits Convention Center was just a dream on the drawing boards then, but the construction unions, Local 824 of the operating engineers, Local 6 of the hotel workers, and most importantly, the longshoremen, all of them had Mickey's hand on their throat. He took a piece of every loan, every Shylock collection, every truck that rolled off the Hudson piers. He ran the floating dice games at the Skyline Motor Inn on 10th Avenue. He owned a piece of every off-track bookmaker from Times Square to Columbus Circle. But here is what set him apart, and what eventually got him killed. Mickey Spillane refused to sell heroin. The big Italian families were drowning the city in dope by 1971, and Spillane could have made millions. He didn't. When asked why, he reportedly told his closest lieutenant, Tom Devaney, that he didn't want his daughter to grow up knowing her father poisoned the kids on the block. He returned a ransom paid by a tugboat captain's wife in 1972. $12,000 he gave back when he found out she'd taken a second mortgage to pay it. Every December, he showed up at St. Raphael's Parish on 41st Street with a station wagon full of frozen turkeys, hams, and envelopes of cash for families with no Christmas. Now meet the man who would butcher him for it. James Michael Coonan was born in 1946 on West 43rd Street, 3 blocks from Spillane. Same neighborhood, same parish, different world entirely. Where Spillane was old school, Coonan was something new, cold, mathematical. He wore a tailored sport coat and combed his hair like a banker. He had the face of a choir boy and the eyes of an undertaker. The trouble between them started young. In 1966, Coonan's father, John Coonan, an accountant who had nothing to do with the rackets, was kidnapped and beaten by 2 of Spillane's associates over a debt that wasn't even his. The story Jimmy told for the rest of his life was that Spillane had personally pistol-whipped his father in the basement of a bar on 10th Avenue. Whether Mickey actually swung the pistol is disputed. Some accounts say he wasn't even there. What is documented is that John Coonan came home bloodied, broken, and humiliated. And his 16-year-old son swore on the kitchen floor of their 43rd Street apartment that he would kill Mickey Spillane if it took him the rest of his life. It would take him 11 years. Coonan went away to Sing Sing in 1966 on an attempted murder charge after he tried to shoot one of Spillane's men in broad daylight on 10th Avenue. He was 18 years old. He did 4.5 years upstate. And when he came home in 1971, he came home different, harder. He had spent his prison time studying the Italian families, studying their structures, studying how a smaller crew could survive by becoming useful to the bigger ones. He came home with a plan. He also came home with a partner. Francis T. Featherstone, known to everyone as Mickey, was a 22-year-old Vietnam veteran with a Bronze Star, a Purple Heart, and a head full of ghosts. 2 combat tours with the Special Forces. Came back to Hell's Kitchen in 1969, and within months killed a black man on 10th Avenue in a dispute that nobody could quite explain. Beat the murder rap on an insanity defense. Walked the streets of Hell's Kitchen with a .32 caliber automatic in his waistband and a 1,000-yard stare that emptied bars when he walked in. Featherstone was Coonan's perfect weapon. He didn't want power. He didn't want money. What he wanted was a brother, a war, and a reason to keep pulling triggers. Coonan gave him all 3. Here is how Coonan and Featherstone began their 2-year hunt for Mickey Spillane. They started small. Robberies. Loan shark collections in territory Spillane considered his. Hijackings off the piers Spillane controlled. Each move was calculated to insult, to test, to draw a response. The opportunity was real. By 1973, Spillane was over 40, married with 3 sons, and spending more time at his home in Woodside, Queens, than at the social clubs on 10th Avenue. He had moved his family across the river to get them away from the violence. That distance, that softening, was the crack Coonan drove a wedge into. The inside connection was a man named Tom Devaney. Devaney had been Spillane's right hand for years. But by 1974, Devaney was tired. Tired of the slow money, tired of the codes, tired of watching the Italians get rich off heroin, while Hell's Kitchen Irishmen still rolled drunks for $50. Coonan worked on him. Bought him drinks at the Sunbright Bar on 10th Avenue. Talked numbers. Talked future. By 1975, Devaney was passing information to Coonan about Spillane's movements, his routines, the bars he drank at, the times he made his calls. The execution was patient. On July 20th, 1975, 3 of Spillane's top lieutenants were murdered in a span of just 6 months Tom Devaney himself was shot dead inside the Sunbright Bar on August 20th, 1976. Some said Coonan had him killed because Devaney knew too much. Some said Devaney was killed by Spillane's people for being a rat. The accounts vary on this. What is documented is that by the end of 1976, Mickey Spillane had lost 5 men in the streets of Hell's Kitchen, and he had no idea who was actually behind it. Then came Eddie Cumiskey. Cumiskey was an old-school Irish hitman, just paroled from Sing Sing, who Spillane considered loyal. Coonan got to him first, bought him drinks at the Skyline Motel Bar on 10th Avenue, told him about a new way of doing business. Cumiskey was the man who taught Jimmy Coonan the technique that would become the Westies' signature. The dismemberment. Cut the body into manageable pieces, pack the pieces into duffel bags, distribute the bags across the city. No body, no homicide. No homicide, no case. The first time they used it was on a small time loan shark named Paddy Dugan in 1975. Featherstone shot Dugan inside the Sunbright Bar. Cumiskey took the body to an apartment on West 56th Street and went to work with a butcher knife. The head was placed in a paper bag and, according to multiple court accounts, was passed around several West Side bars as a sick joke. The hands were cut off and dumped separately. The torso went into the Hudson River. The case was never solved. That was the world Mickey Spillane was living in by 1976. His men were disappearing. His territory was being chipped away. And he still didn't fully grasp what was happening, because what was happening was something the old Irish mob had never seen before, a new crew that didn't follow any rules at all. By the spring of 1977, Spillane knew he was losing. He went to the only people who could help him, the Italians, specifically the Genovese family. He sat down with Capos at a steakhouse on West 46th Street and asked for a sit-down with Coonan. He was told that a meeting could be arranged. What he wasn't told was that the Genovese family had already made their decision. They wanted Coonan, not Spillane. Coonan had reached out to them through the Gambino family, specifically through a soldier named Roy DeMeo, the same Roy DeMeo whose Brooklyn crew was already running its own dismemberment operation out of the Gemini Lounge. Coonan had offered the Italians something Spillane never would: total cooperation, tribute, and access to the West Side piers. The Italians chose Coonan. What happened next is something that still stuns the men who studied this case at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. The Genovese family didn't just give their blessing for Coonan to take Hell's Kitchen. They gave him the location. They gave him the time. They told him exactly where Mickey Spillane could be found, alone on a specific night at a specific bar in Woodside, Queens. Some accounts say the contract was actually carried out by hitters provided by the Italians, not by Coonan or Featherstone personally. What is documented in court records is that Coonan paid for the hit. The price has been reported at various figures between $15,000 and $25,000. The shooters were professionals. They knew Spillane's exact routine. They knew he stopped at the Fontainebleau on 46th Street in Woodside almost every night. They knew he always made a phone call from the corner booth before heading home. They knew his wife's number. October 13th, 1977, 1:45 in the morning. Spillane finished his last drink, said goodnight to the bartender, and walked out into the cold. He crossed the sidewalk to the phone booth. He picked up the receiver. He dropped a dime. He started to dial. He never heard them coming. The first bullet entered his lower back and exited through his abdomen. The second hit him between the shoulder blades. He went down hard, the receiver swinging on its cord. The third and fourth shots were fired into his head as he lay on the sidewalk. The casings were left in the street. The shooters walked, calm and unhurried, to a waiting car. The whole thing took less than 30 seconds. His wife, Maureen, was still on the line when she heard the shots. She heard the receiver fall. She heard her husband's body hit the ground. She heard the footsteps walking away. She would later tell investigators that for the rest of her life, she would hear those footsteps every time the phone rang. The forensics were brutal. Time of death was estimated at 1:51 in the morning. 4 shell casings recovered, all .45 caliber. Blood loss was massive. The medical examiner ruled that Spillane was likely dead before the ambulance arrived. He was 44 years old. He left behind his wife and 3 sons. His youngest was 7. The funeral at St. Raphael's was packed. Old longshoremen, dock workers, neighborhood mothers, off-duty cops who had grown up on 10th Avenue. They all came to bury the gentleman gangster. Jimmy Coonan didn't show up. He was already at the Skyline Motor Inn on 10th Avenue, taking over the floating dice game. What happened after Mickey Spillane went into the ground was a bloodbath unlike anything Hell's Kitchen had ever seen. Within 6 months, Coonan and Featherstone had taken over every racket Spillane once controlled. The shylocking, the bookmaking, the union shakedowns, the Javits Center construction project alone, which broke ground in 1979, would generate millions in extortion money for the new Irish mob. Coonan had what Spillane never wanted, an alliance with the Gambino family. He paid tribute. He took orders. And in return, Paul Castellano gave the Westies the contracts that the Italians didn't want to dirty their hands with. The body count became staggering. Federal prosecutors would later attribute somewhere between 30 and over 100 murders to the Westies between 1977 and 1986. The exact number was impossible to know. Because of Eddie Comiskey's old technique, half the victims were never found. They were in duffel bags scattered across landfills. They were in the East River. They were chopped into pieces small enough to fit in restaurant freezers and then thrown out with the garbage on Tuesday mornings. The crew got its name from a federal prosecutor in the early 80s who, while reviewing wiretap transcripts, kept hearing the Italians refer to Coonan's crew dismissively as those Westies, those guys from the West Side. The name stuck. By 1985, the Westies were considered, pound for pound, the most violent organized crime crew in the United States. But the same paranoia that had killed Mickey Spillane eventually consumed them. Mickey Featherstone, the Vietnam vet with the 1,000-yard stare, was set up by Coonan in 1986, framed for a murder he didn't commit, convicted, sent to prison. From his cell, Featherstone realized that the brother he had killed for, the brother he had stalked Mickey Spillane for, had used him up and thrown him away. So Featherstone did the one thing a Hell's Kitchen Irishman was never supposed to do. He cooperated with the federal government. His testimony, combined with wiretaps and witness statements, led to the RICO indictment of 1987. Jimmy Coonan was convicted in 1988 and sentenced to 75 years in federal prison. He died behind bars on April 4, 2017, at the age of 70. He never saw Hell's Kitchen as a free man again. Featherstone went into witness protection and disappeared into a small town somewhere in the American Midwest. The last reliable accounts placed him still alive, still haunted, still trying to outrun the ghosts of 10th Avenue. Tom Devaney was already dead. Eddie Comiskey had been murdered in 1977, just months before Spillane, killed in a bar on 10th Avenue by a man who feared what Comiskey was going to do next. Roy DeMeo, the Gambino soldier who introduced Coonan to the Italians, was found in the trunk of a Cadillac in Brooklyn in January 1983, killed by his own family. And Hell's Kitchen itself? It changed in ways nobody on 10th Avenue could have imagined. The neighborhood was rezoned in the 1990s. The old tenements came down. The longshoremen retired. St. Raphael's Parish, where Mickey Spillane handed out Christmas turkeys for 2 decades, was deconsecrated and sold. Today, the corner where his crew once ran a floating dice game holds a luxury condo where 1-bedroom apartments rent for over $4,000 a month. So what does the story of Mickey Spillane actually reveal? It reveals the moment when the old American underworld died. Spillane represented a kind of organized crime that had rules, a code, a version of the gangster who saw himself as a member of his community, even as he stole from it. Coonan represented what came next. A pure mathematical violence with no loyalty to neighborhood, no tradition, no limits. He was, in his way, the prototype for the modern criminal entrepreneur, useful to the bigger powers, loyal to nobody, capable of anything. Mickey Spillane returned a kidnapping ransom because he thought taking it all would be disrespectful. Jimmy Coonan dismembered his enemies and sold their freezers for scrap metal. That is the distance that 1 decade traveled in Hell's Kitchen. That is what 4 bullets outside a phone booth in Woodside actually killed. Not just one man, an entire way of being a gangster. Mickey Spillane was the last of his kind, the gentleman of 10th Avenue, the boss who gave away turkeys at Christmas and refused to sell heroin to his neighbors. He had every chance to become richer. He had every chance to become harder. He chose, instead, to remain the man his mother prayed for. And in 1977 New York, that choice was a death sentence. That's the real story of the Westies, not their rise, the thing they had to butcher to clear the road. A code, a neighborhood. A gentleman dialing his wife from a phone booth at 1:45 in the morning who never got to say goodbye. If this story pulled you in, hit subscribe. We drop a new mob documentary every week. Drop a comment below. Should we cover Mickey Featherstone next, or take you inside the Roy DeMeo crew? You decide.